Thank you, Bill. It's so great to be here yet again at a wonderful red sky. I'm Matt Weiner. I'm the CEO and founder of Megafire Action. We are a nonprofit organization focused on enacting policy solutions to catastrophic wildfire. I talk to a lot of business leaders, like folks in this room, and they say, okay, what does that mean? And to simplify it, what it means is that we go out into the field and listen to leaders like you and hear what you need from us and from government to make things work and to enable this ecosystem to thrive. The follow-up question I get is, but nothing's happening in Washington. Why are you wasting your time there? And while it can be hard to push back on that narrative from time to time, wildfires actually emerged as this rare area of opportunity where big things are happening. So many of you have heard about the president's executive order to create a unified national fire service. There's a technology roadmap being put out by the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and many other efforts throughout government to figure out how we get better tech in the hands of people who need it so that we can do this job better, faster, and cheaper. And nowhere is there a better example of this than the Fix Our Forest Act. So the Fix Our Forest Act is legislation in Congress right now that has moved through the House on a bipartisan basis and is now in the Senate. And sorry, got a audio feedback thing. But so it's now in the Senate, and it has a real chance of becoming law. The bill is, despite what a lot of people think when they hear bipartisan and DC, they think it's probably not big. This is a huge transformational change in the way that the Forest Service, Department of Interior, and others plan, permit, and execute wildfire mitigation projects. And most importantly for those in this room, has a number of really key technology provisions, including the creation of a new wildfire intelligence center and more. So I'm very excited to have with us today two senators who are leading this effort in the United States Senate, Senator Alex Padilla and Senator John Curtis of Utah. Many of you will already know Senator Padilla because 2 years ago he first announced the Wildfire Intelligence Center at Red Sky, and now we're on the precipice of getting it signed into law. And go Dodgers, Senator. Big week. And then Senator Curtis has really emerged as a player in Washington, D.C., who people are going to on both sides of the aisle when they want to get big things done. And I'm really happy that he's decided to take so much of his time and effort to focus on wildfire policy, and I'm really glad to have them here today for this conversation. I'm also thrilled because usually I'm testifying before these guys and they get to ask the questions. But today I get to ask the questions, so we get to turn the tables a little bit here. Before we get started, though, I was at the Conservative Climate Caucus with Senator Curtis a couple weeks ago, and he gave everyone there a pair of John Curtis socks that were very cool, and he's a big sock guy. So I wanted to have Grace Ballone, who's on the senator's staff and has been integral to getting Fix Our Forest passed, help us present you with some Red Sky socks that we'll make sure get back to both of you in DC. And we look forward to a picture of both of you wearing them together at the bill signing ceremony. Thanks, Grace.
Bipartisan socks. Yeah.
So let's get started. Senators, thank you so much for being here. We're talking about Fix Our Forest. We're talking about the most consequential reform to federal land management in at least a generation, arguably since the 70s. In a bitterly divided Washington, why has wildfire emerged as an area of such a strong bipartisan opportunity?
Sure. Well, I think for starters, we've all experienced the impact of increasingly devastating wildfires, especially this last decade. Right? We know our climate's changing. Weather patterns are changing, and that has fed some of the most largest and record-setting wildfires over the course of the last 10 years. And these fires don't respect any political boundaries. You have represented here California and Utah. Our partners in the legislation represent Colorado and Montana, Senators Hickenlooper and Sheehy. Talk to people in Nevada, talk to people in Idaho. And it's not just the West anymore. Talk to people in the Carolinas and outside of Texas and Arkansas, Oklahoma. So it has become a growing national concern. And when we sort of check politics, partisan politics at the door, and allow ourselves to be driven by data and science, then it's easy to rally together across the aisle to do something about a crisis that's devastated so many communities, so many families, so many businesses. has taken a tremendous toll. So that's how we first came together, and we've been talking about it for a couple of years. I got to say, the devastation in Southern California at the beginning of this year is what finally added the urgency to get something done much sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I would say a couple of things to start. First of all, to my colleague from California, it's an honor to work with you. This has been a really good experience. I think we would all agree. Matt, it was great to have you out in Utah, and your audience there won't understand that we were actually having a climate summit in Utah. Isn't that a great thing? But I also want to add to what the senator said, and totally agree about this concept of like these fires don't have boundaries. Both of our states, all 4 senators that were involved in this, have had devastating forest fires. But we're in Senator Padilla's office right now, and I can remember several months back we were a little bit deadlocked on this, and we met in his conference room. And I remember very clearly a conversation where he and Senator Hickenlooper communicated a concern they had, and our response was, well, we have that same concern. And it just taking the time to slow down and actually say, look, I hear you. I understand what's important to you. And I can see why that would concern you. And so what can we do to fix that? And I would just say that a lot of trust was built. And without that trust, it's really hard to move forward. And a trust that we really all did want the same thing in the end. And that we had certain concerns that we had to accommodate along the way. And so my hat's off to not just the senators, but to be honest, the staff, right, who work behind the scenes to get to that level of trust where we could really say what was bothering us and what we needed changed. And I haven't been involved as many as I have in this time when everything just came together and the staffs and the senators worked really well together to get past those hurdles.
It's fantastic, and I gave Grace a shout out, of course, but Nate Bentham on your staff, Senator Padilla, has been a real leader and is a big reason that we're here today. The bill itself is much more robust than the House version that passed, which was a bill that Megafire Action strongly supported and pushed for. But we were able to get a lot more provisions in there around prescribed fire, community resilience, and the like. How did you come together to work on what needed to be added to this to make it a really comprehensive wildfire bill?
Yeah. Well, again, when the House acted on the bill earlier in the year, that put a question before the Senate, where we're just going to sort of rubber stamp the product as imperfect as it was, or do we take the opportunity to seize it and say, no, let's improve upon it in a way that can pass the Senate, where it has to be bipartisan, but just bipartisan enough isn't acceptable. We want it to be overwhelmingly bipartisan. So the value set that we shared was, number one, how do we go on offense to how we deal with wildfires? How do we prevent them if we can? How do we mitigate them however we can and work together for long-term recovery? Second, how do we harness the experience and the expertise, not just across federal government, but look, in each of our respective states, we have some experience of federal agencies working with state agencies, working with local governments, working with tribal governments. So if each individually have had that experience, imagine if we pulled it all together. And the Wildfire Intelligence Center is a great example of that, not just through the collaboration piece, but really honing in on not just best practices and emerging technologies, but even if I can be so bold as to say, how do we invest in R&D to continually get better at doing all this, because the sophistication of the wildfires that we're up against continue to grow as well.
Yeah, and I'd love to give a shout out to our House colleagues. Look, if they don't get a product over to us, right, then we don't have anything. And so, yes, we did make changes to it. I think we've done a really good job of keeping our House colleagues apprised of the changes, and they're supportive of our changes. But a big shout out to Bruce Westerman and Scott Peters for actually getting a product over to us, right, and for their support now of the bill as it comes back. And I think a lot of times America doesn't really get to see that iterative process of refinement as things get better, going back and forth between the two bodies. And I think this was almost a textbook case of, yeah, they put something forward, we put our touch on it, has to both pass the House and the Senate, right? And so I think we've got a product going back to them now that they're pleased with and can pass the House as well.
Absolutely. So quick follow-up to that, Senator Curtis. What does this bill do? I mean, so to take a step back from that, This is largely and originally a planning and permitting bill. So what problem are we trying to solve for here? Help folks in the audience who are less familiar with land management understand what we're trying to achieve.
Well, I'll give you a really good example. One of our largest, it was probably our largest fire in Utah this summer, was the Monroe Fire. And I went down and met with the Forest Service, and it burned this massive area of mountain. And they sat down and they showed me a map, and they said, wherever we have managed before the fire, prescribed burns and otherwise, that contained the fire. And the boundaries of the fire were almost completely where they had had an opportunity to go in and manage that forest in a responsible way. And so without that management, that fire would have been far worse. But with more management, it would have been much smaller. And yet, some of those things that they do to manage that fire can take a year, sometimes 2 years, sometimes 5 years to get approval to move forward on it. And we need to treat, tens of millions of acres of land, and we're just not doing it in a way that moves it forward fast enough. So on the surface, one of the things, and that's one of the things that about this bill that's great, it's not just one aspect. There's a lot of aspects, the technology centers. One of the things it does is it frees up the hands to make decisions, not shortcuts. I want to be really careful with that, not shortcuts, but just move forward on decisions that are good land management and will protect those forests. And I'm really excited for those aspects of the bill.
I think the quality and timely decision making and actionable items, because of the integration of the expertise and the brain trust, if you will. I think that's huge. Two other sort of examples, similar to yours, the Wildfire in California.
Yes.
You can see during the incident and in the after action report, areas that had been treated prior to the fire is what slowed the fire down and what allowed firefighters to save property, save lives as a result. So you have proof in the pudding here to work from. The other being back to the fires this last January, when some of the approvals for fire breaks came after the fact, and we know what could have been prevented if we weren't caught up in the bureaucracy. So that informed sort of the element of the bill that allows us to go up to 10,000 in terms of the area to be treated, because when you're dealing with the West, you're dealing with larger forests, larger patches of federal land. That's not the case in other parts of the country. And so again, we have to recognize the threat of wildfires for what we know them to be, driven by statistics, driven by data, driven by science, driven from experience.
Absolutely, thank you. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Tahoe or some of the work happening on the ground in Sequoias, a lot of what's in this bill is modeled after the good work that's been happening on the ground in those two places, and so we're happy to see that scaled based on success we've seen elsewhere. I want to get us to the core reason that we're at this summit today, which is wildfire technology. So starting with you, Senator Padilla, the planning and permitting gets a lot of focus, but this is a transformational bill in terms of wildfire technology. The Intelligence Center, some of the grant reforms that are in the bill to allow technology to be used, and the testbed pilot as well. As you were working on this bill, and like I mentioned earlier, you announced it 2 years ago here, this Intelligence Center. Walk us through how your evolution came together on what the vision for wildfire technology in this bill looked like, how it can help us get things done, and the role that advocates in this room, including the Association for Fire Technology, played when they came in to meet with you and talk about their issues.
I think there was a couple of things that really converged for me. One was visiting some of the fires from my early years in the Senate, and seeing firsthand a command center with federal agencies, state agencies, local governments working together for better and for worse in California. We've had way too much experience in intergovernmental collaboration during and in response to natural disasters, be they fires, be they floods, be they all types of natural disasters. And while California's gotten good at it because of those tough experiences, there's a lot of value to take from that collaboration and coordination to apply these best practices that help inform another bill that we won't talk too much about today, but our Fire Act. How do we reform FEMA's policies and procedures so that they get better at preparing for and responding to wildfires, just as they've gotten really, really good at preparing and responding to hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, other types of disasters that are predictable. Second, this is what happens when you have an engineer in the United States Senate. So as you all have come through, before there was a formal trade group, now especially since there's a trade group, talking about your different ideas on emerging technologies, coupled with, again, the experience and the data sets that we're able to share to provide new ideas, whether it's on monitoring, whether it's on modeling, whether it's on resilience, right? That's one of the big pieces here, having learned from the January fires in Southern California. We're not talking about a remote area of national forest here. We're talking about wildland urban interface. And especially in communities where not all the homes have been in the last 10 years to modern building standards, but a lot of homes and structures that are decades old, and whether individually or in aggregate, not as resilient as we could and should be. So a lot of experience, a lot of expertise that we want to continue to build on.
Yeah, I'd love to just add to that. First of all, thanks for your vision, having this a couple years ago. So glad, right, they could be
Here we
part
are.
of this bill. But I'd love to invite us all back here in a couple of years and reconvene this group and talk about all the things that have come along in the last couple of years to innovate the way we deal with these fires. Everything from understanding where the fire started, where it is, when it started, to the way we fight it. I suspect we will see innovation that will save firefighters' lives. We'll see innovation that will save property. We'll save innovation that will save carbon emissions. I mean, just the number of innovations, right, that are out there. And I think if we're honest, this is an industry that has not been highly innovative over the years. And creating an environment to foster that, I'm just really excited about. I suspect there's going to be some really exciting things. And we're going to call on your audience, right, to step up in this moment. Like, we're creating the framework for you here. Now we need all of you to step up and deliver big. And I have no doubt you will.
We're ready
And
to
I
put
couldn't
you to
help,
work.
I can't allow this session to end without making the following point as well. I mean, there's two big challenges that we're trying to tackle, started with California experience and now it's national. Yes, number one, the threat and impact of wildfires. And number two, just climate change, right? They're interlinked. Because of our changing climate, it's made fires more frequent, more severe, more devastating. And then those fires, due to their emissions in turn, are adding to our changing climates and severe weather patterns. And so that's the challenge and the opportunity here. How do we tackle both in one? The better we can address the wildfire scenario, we're doing our part in the changing climate. I think it was the year 2020 where that fire season alone had emissions because of the fires that undid about 20 years of emission reduction work in the state of California. That's real.
Yeah, and the economic, not just the climate, but the economic impact, both because of climate and the impact on the economies. Imagine the total cost of these fires to our society, and that's why we need this bill, and I think that's why we'll get it across the finish line.
Thank you. And
With your help.
When we're at time, Senator Curtis, really quickly, what comes next for the bill?
Well, so listen, for the bill itself, we need to get floor time. That's a precious commodity here in the Senate. I think we'll get it. We've talked to Leader Thune about it. I think we'll get that, and we'll get that back to the House. But this maybe wasn't your question, but what comes next beyond this is permitting reform. And I actually think that a lot of what we did in this bill will help us with permitting reform. A lot of the consensus we found will be very, very important, which is equally important for all the reasons we've discussed today.
Yeah.
Permitting reform and resources, funding.
Yes.
To implement the measures called for in the Fix Our Forest Act. So we start off with bipartisan support, which is great. And again, with your support and advocacy, I'm confident we're going to get there.
Thank you, senators. And just in closing here, I think the big takeaway for folks in this room is there's a huge moment of opportunity right now in the wildfire space. And if you engage, even a new group of folks engaging earlier this year in the policy space, we're able to pretty dramatically shape how this bill is coming together. One example is our meeting with Senator Padilla, where he heard us talking about the test bed pilot program in the bill. And he said, well, this is proven technology. Why are we making it a pilot? Why don't we look to the Defense Innovation Unit model and other models to get us into deployment and getting tech into the hands of people that need it? That wouldn't have happened without engagement from folks in this room. And so I think it's just really important that we keep that in mind going forward, that this is a moment and it's on us to take advantage of it. Senators, thank you so much for your work on this issue. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Washington next time.
Thank you.